Welcome back to the table. One of my most anticipated releases over recent years was back in 2018, which was Thunder in the East, released by it was Victory Point Games, designed primarily by Frank Chadwick, who has a long history of producing games in the wargaming industry. Quite a few plaudits, and I think justifiably so. When this came out, it was definitely one that passed the weight check, and there's a lot in the box. A big box. This sort of size box, which was certainly required to fit all the bits in. It was 3 maps, or possibly two big and 2 small. I forget exactly how they lay out now. Number of play aids, lots of counters, big, thick, high quality counters. A rule book that was 80 odd pages. If you exclude the optional and the campaign rules, it allowed you to get into the game with about a 60-page rule book, which I suppose was quite typical for the time. Custom dice. These were specialised dice that were rolled along with the D6 for the nominal combat results table result, and they gave you additional shifts dependent on typically how much air support was being added and whether they had red or white lightning bolts, and it's all quite sort of interesting and chromy stuff, but it did, I think, a good job of representing the air war on the Eastern Front at a fairly abstract level. So you weren't building air bases and continually trying to have engineers to push the air bases forward. And it was done in quite a neat way, with plenty of chrome, different aircraft with various sort of capabilities, and it all seemed to hang together quite well. I played a number of games face to face and also on Vassal, and was initially very impressed with it. There's a few little things that didn't quite sit with me. I think one of the earlier ones was improved positions, where you can essentially, there is a big element of production in the game where you have equipment points and personnel points, and you use these to produce not just your ground and air units but also defensive positions, and you can create improved positions on the map which you can place on your units even if they're in a ZOC, and these seemed incredibly flexible. And even if the line got attacked and these were removed, you could just put them back again on the next turn. It just seemed too flexible to me, and I raised it as a bit of a concern. And you could also convert morale points into entrenchments, which meant that once you were beyond the danger zone of losing Moscow and losing the game on a morale loss, you could freely cash in spare morale for even more of these entrenchments, and the whole thing just seemed a bit weird. That was a minor thing, but essentially most of it seemed to work quite well. There few concerns with supply. You seemed to be able to push supply into the Russian rear areas a bit too easily with the German motorised forces, because they could ignore enemy ZOCs or enemy leg ZOCs for tracing their supply back to the HQs. The logistical element of the game, the logistics was, I thought, very well done. you have the HQs, which can be in either balanced or combat mode. Balance giving you a bit more range. The combat mode gave you the range for the motorised units, but not for the leg units, and also a shift in combat. And when they move forward to the next position, typically another city which they've captured, you have a countdown marker. I think it's three turns. So that it gives you those natural pauses which you don't see in many other games. So that was something that I really liked with the game. So that there were one or two issues with it, and there was this feeling that they're starting to change quite a few things as well, which I know put off quite a few people, because when I stopped playing it for a bit and I went back to play the new version with a friend of mine, and we went onto Vassal and we downloaded the new Vassal mod. And there's a guy I played it with before, at least twice, and we just didn't really recognise what we were doing. There was a new play aid, some of the mechanics had changed, there'd been not root and branch rules alterations, but a sufficient number that meant that we couldn't just play with a few tweaks. And it just sat there, and I was, as a spectator, watching this thing evolve and just thinking, this is just many changes. There were changes to the some of the cards. There's card play in the game, which again is a nice twist. You get to select your sort of strategy going forward based on what cards you play. So there were changes to some of the cards. Many of the rules were altered. I don't mind errata. I mean, you know, errata's basically a given, and anyone who plays games will tell you that. But when it involves alterations to counters, or counters that you don't even have because they can appear in the Vassal version, but you're not going to get them in your hard copy, and card changes and new play aids, and it just, you were trying to jump on a bus that was moving, and I just lost the will to sort of try and actually sort of run for that bus. So I don't know who plays this now. I'm on a list of contacts. I've been sent recent rules, and I think the rules are now, and bear in mind it is a system which is expanding to the Mediterranean and to Northwest Europe, so it's not a fair comparison really, but just for a point to note that the rulebook is now at 394 pages, which has an entry barrier to someone who thinks, oh, I'll get that box off my game shelf and let me just get the latest living rules and give it a go. I would suggest that entry barrier is pretty high. I don't know who still plays this. I think they may have lost some of the audience. There's a dedicated core of guys who are playtesting all these rules, and they're sort of living in this world. But for most of us, we just want to play the game that we got 3 or 4 years ago with a few rules to adjust the play balance and to sort of clean up a few things. So the guys in my group don't play it really anymore. There's about 3 or 4 of us that have got copies. But I did play it once with a friend, and we had a few house rules. So a few of the changes that have been introduced in this development process I could see were of benefit, and one of them was the ability to overrun a stack with more than one step. You could make them sort of non-overrunnable hexes by simply having 2 units in them. It didn't matter what they were, which which all seemed a bit odd, and it took away some of the options. And I think options and choices are always a good thing in a game, and knowing you can just lock down an area from overruns by putting 2 steps in the hex, to me was a bit too simplistic, and I think that's been recognised. They've tweaked the overrun, the mobile assault rule, so I've plucked that out of the rules and plumbed that into my little set house rules. They've got rules on what they call small heavies, where a tank division and a Russian tank corps can affect supply trace, not retreats, but supply trace of other mechanised formations. So I think that was quite good. What else was there? The frostbite rule didn't seem to work very well as written. You have a few second line garrison troops that you would just take a few hits on, which were the cheaper ones to replace. And I think that was seen to be a fairly sort of benign rule, really. So that's been altered to make it a bit more realistic. So thanks, I'll have that one. We had a house rule on the weather, so it's still variable, but it's sort of contained. You can't get extremes of weather, which would definitely blow the game one way or the other. If you have a long hot summer with no bad weather and flight all the time, the Germans are just going to walk away with it, I suspect. So we had a few stop checks, just to introduce a bit of balance to that. What else was there? They had a rule on hindered air forces. That seemed to make sense. And that was something about taking losses in combats. You couldn't just take it on the cheap stuff. I like that too. And that was about it. So I'm gonna try it again. I'm going to go for with the intention of the campaign start rather than the Barbarossa start. I've set it up. I've read the rules. Most of them still seem to be buried somewhere in the grey matter, so that wasn't too difficult to relearn. They made a minor change to the CRT, I noticed, which I was pleased about because I raised it as a bit of an odd one. It seems sometimes you were better off attacking at lower odds with the CRT as published. And there was a reason given at the time, which I didn't find particularly convincing, but I now see that's actually been altered. So I'll grab the new combat, the ground CRT. There was an optional or a change to the air. I'm going to stick with what was in the box for that. So for those who haven't seen it, I will show you around the map. You get some idea. It needs quite a lot of space. It's a bit of a table grab. Not just the map, but also various other charts and things which I've got sort of littered around the office. But let me show you those, and so I'm more than happy to share these house rules with anyone that would be interested in getting the game back to the table, because I think it's, in a day you had a lot of fun with it, and value for money, what you get in the box was very good, I think, compared to what now gets sold as a £70 or £80 game. This was, I think, just over £100 at the time, and full of stuff. So let's give you a visual look round. Right, so here we are, start of Operation Barbarossa. You can see the counters. These are big counters. Come in 3 different sizes, sort of large, medium, and small. And you can see that's an example of a small one. That's a Russian paratroop unit, and that's a large one and a medium one. It's also unknown strengths as well for a lot of the Russians, so for the mechanised corps and the infantry corps. So quite good for solitaire play. These are some of the previously mentioned improved positions, which have been seriously cut back on their availability now. You can still build them and place them, but you can't put them into a ZOC unless it comes from a card play, or it's the one that you get free each turn. That's what I'm doing. It just seems to restrict them from appearing all over the map. You've got to plan your defensive lines before it forms, which seems pretty sensible. So I'm using the historical setups. These are available on Consim World. So I've gone with those, which I think is fine, because I just spend far too long working out where to put all the Russians otherwise. I think it's pretty balanced. The Romanian front, nothing happens there on the first turn. You can see the HQs, these are the big circles. There is an optional to use smaller square counters if you prefer. You're given those as well in the counter mix. And let's get around here, you'll see again it's on the 4x6 table. So there is Thunder in the East in all its glory. And over here you'll see some of the charts. So this is the Russian play aid, which got all these guys that will be coming on at various points during the war. You've got a generic track there to record equipment and personnel points and fuel and all those good things. Some of the custom dice. These are quite nice. These are used to give a clear view of the range of a. So if you had an HQ in combat mode, you'd sort of 6 hexes from there. Just little things which they put into the pack, as well as these custom dice. There's 3 of those and the normal standard D6. It's a weather card. Starts off good weather. Here is the German display for comparison. There's a lot less stuff due to come on, as you'd expect. You have a force pool, so you can build up and break down the armies into corps, and then even the corps into divisions, to give you a certain amount of operational flexibility. Quite like that idea. And this is all the air. So as mentioned, a very abstract way of doing it, but I think it's one of the better treatments I've seen of fighting the air war on the Eastern Front. There's enough chrome there with different air types. The bowling ball means they're more vulnerable, the shield means they're better defensively, and you've got the lightning bolts, the white or the red, which can be used. The red can be used defensively as well as offensively, all those kind of things, and various ways you can degrade the air force when they're being flown and damaged and destroyed and all that sort of stuff. And the cards, so these ones are, when they've been played, they're either discarded, which is these guys here, or they're set aside, and that just determines when they can come back into the card mix. This is our turn record track with the weather. And then up here I've even had to use, you can see this is the sort of the economic play aid, which shows the capture of cities and the loss in morale and Lend-Lease and all those good things. That's actually sitting up on the shelf. So if you've only got a small table, this might be a bit of a challenge. But if you've got a decent sized table, along with a few other small tables, you should be good to go. And I'm going to give it a crack and see how we get on.